I don't normally tune into General Motors investor days, but I was pretty excited to see what they talk about the future of autonomous cars. Their valuation, Tesla is running laps around GM in terms of valuation, even though GM is the number 5 or 4 based on revenue or units on the planet, and Tesla is way, way down there. Now, why is that the case? Because investors see as the future as autonomy and the future as EV, and more important, I'll call it the infinitely customizable car, and that's something that people lose sight of. So they came out and GM introduced what's called Ultra Cruise, and this is a higher positioned system than Cruise, which think of Cruise as L1 up to L2 plus, and think of Ultra Cruise as 3 and maybe 4. It was hard to determine exactly how far it went into 4, but these things are kind of amorphous. But the ability, and I'll quote GM on this, and this is part of the news that's important. True hands-free driving across 95% of driving scenarios. And GM says Ultra Cruise will ultimately enable door-to-door hands-free driving on all public roads in the U.S. Now, they didn't say no steering wheel, and they didn't say that the drivers weren't going to be in there. So that leads me to believe 3 and 4. But deep in their press release and their slide deck was this: we are using 5, I'm going to use air quotes, nanometer technology, and the architecture is scalable. And I was like, okay, 2 companies that I think have that now, NVIDIA, well, at least the scalable part, NVIDIA and Qualcomm. NVIDIA hasn't talked so much about the 5 nanometer, but there is a company, a chip company that you and I both know that has 5 nanometer and a scalable platform called Qualcomm Ride. And I did an analysis at CES 2020 that cataloged that Qualcomm and GM were aligning for ADAS. So was this Qualcomm? Is this Qualcomm silicon? GM didn't say it. Qualcomm didn't say it, but I'm kind of following the breadcrumbs there. And if I look at Qualcomm, $10 billion automotive backlog, $1 billion annual run rate based on the most recent quarter, $250 million in revenue. I'm kind of thinking that this is Qualcomm.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Pat. This is not hard to back into. GM doesn't want to get its investors lost in who its technology partners are. So it instead focused on process, the capabilities, the technology. But of course, if you're a semiconductor company, only Intel has ever been able to somehow convince every one of its OEMs to slap its brand all over its products, which credit to Intel for that. We'll talk more about them a little bit later. But in terms of companies like Qualcomm, I wrote a piece after IAA Mobility in Germany, kind of talking about semiconductor companies becoming the linchpin of the future of automotive. This is a great example where looking at the underpinnings of companies as large as GM, and of course, you're going to see the same thing with the Volkswagen groups, huge automotive groups, understanding which companies they are acquiring their technology is going to give a pretty good insight into growth and the role that semiconductor players are making. Now, I'm going to pivot the Qualcomm discussion here on that note, because Snapdragon Ride is, I'm almost certain, what's going to drive the future of GM's autonomous driving platform. And of course, Snapdragon Ride is an extensible platform that also connects the rest of the stack. When you think about things like infotainment, telematics, instrument cluster, it's about this expansive tool set that can be built on compute and that can be scaled out. There are other architectures that are more closed for ADAS, and those are interesting as well. And every OEM is going to approach this differently, but that's the route Qualcomm is on. And speaking of Qualcomm, just want to touch on the fact that you probably heard in automotive, they were, in this battle to buy Veoneer. Originally, Qualcomm had a deal to buy Arriver from Veoneer. And then what happened is a big tier one, Magna, came in and made a tender for the whole company. And so all of a sudden, Qualcomm was going to lose out this prized asset. Arriver is a L2 plus ADAS system that was acquired by Veoneer, and that was really what Qualcomm wanted. They're looking for something that, they're piecing together their ADAS through Snapdragon Ride as it stands. They want to expedite that with some good technology that was held by this Veoneer organization. But with the Magna deal, Qualcomm had to come back to the table, basically aggressively in the night on a Sunday, made a tender over the offer of Magna, got board support, and essentially moving forward. But everyone knew Qualcomm doesn't want to acquire the entire tier one, doesn't want to be a tier one. Qualcomm wanted that intellectual property, innovation, and some components of Veoneer, which was the Arriver platform. And so they came out this week, announced a deal, partnering with a company called SSW. And basically, just to kind of be clear, is now everyone knows the path. The path is going to be SSW is going to acquire Veoneers in its entirety. Qualcomm, for a small sum as compared to the whole deal, is going to acquire Arriver. SSW, this organization, it's not a private equity firm, but it's going to act as a as a partner in essentially identifying the most important assets of the Veoneer organization, and then finding homes for the rest of the company that are ideally more strategic. In the end, Pat, my assessment is this is Qualcomm making a move to stay focused on what it was set out to do, which is expand that ride platform, acquire this ADAS technology, and not get stuck in the middle of parting out a large tier one. Found a partner company to help header the deal. Of course, it's going to get its looks from a regulatory standpoint, but it seems like it was really well organized, put together, and orchestrated under new CEO Cristiano Aman's leadership. And as I see it, they're going to get their man Arriver, and Qualcomm's moving forward. And this automotive space for them is going to be really significant. You said 10 billion pipeline. You can tell the company's really focused on it.
Great analysis. I'm glad you added on the Veoneer piece because it's all part of the puzzle here. I put a lot of links from Daniel and I in the show notes that goes over all this. In fact, Daniel, I wrote an article that said no, Qualcomm isn't becoming an automotive tier one. Not the most creative headlines put up there on Forbes, but I wanted to make that point.